I never thought I'd be one of those people posting here, but after what happened, I need to get this off my chest. For context, my mom remarried last year to a guy named Mark. He seemed normal at first, charming, helpful, and polite. But something about him always felt off. The first weird thing I noticed was how he never ate with us. He'd claim he wasn't hungry or had already eaten, but I never saw him touch food. Then, there were his eyes. Sometimes, when the light hit them just right, they looked reflective, almost like a cat's. At first, I brushed it off. My mom seemed genuinely happy, and I didn't want to ruin that. But things got weirder. One night, I heard something heavy dragging across the hardwood floor in the middle of the night. When I peeked out of my room, Mark was standing in the living room, staring out the window, his back to me. I swear his legs looked too long, like they stretched unnaturally in his pajama pants. I tried telling my mom, but she dismissed it, saying I was being dramatic to accept Mark as part of the family. Then, last weekend, it all came to a head. My mom was out of town visiting me, leaving Mark and me. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was coming from inside the walls. I grabbed my phone and went downstairs to investigate. That's when I saw him. Mark was crouched in the middle of the kitchen, his limbs bent at horrifying angles, his jaw unhinged, stretching wider than any human should as he shoved raw meat into his mouth. It wasn't just the movement that freaked me out. It was the sounds. Wet crunches and guttural growls filled the air. I must have made a noise because his head snapped up, and his glowing, reflective eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't be awake," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his own. I ran. I locked myself in my room and shoved furniture against the door. He didn't try to get in, but I heard him pacing outside all night. The next morning, he was back to normal, or at least pretending to be. I'm still at home, but I don't know what to do. My mom refuses to believe me, and Mark just stares at me with this knowing grin. I can't shake the feeling that he's waiting for something, and I'm terrified of what happens when he decides it's time. What would you do in my situation? Am I overreacting, or do I have a reason to be scared? When my mom met Tom, I thought it was a good thing. She'd been struggling after the divorce, and he seemed to make her happy. At first, he was polite and friendly, but once the honeymoon phase ended, I started noticing things. Tom was always in my space. If I came home from school, he'd already be in my room saying he was just cleaning up. If I got up to grab water in the middle of the night, he'd be sitting in the living room staring at the blank TV screen like he was waiting for something. I told my mom about it once, but she just laughed it off. "He's trying to be a good stepdad," she said. "Give him a break." But then things started escalating. One day, I found a camera hidden in my room. It was in an air vent, angled right at my bed. My stomach dropped. I didn't know how long it had been there, or if there were more. I showed it to my mom, and she got angry. At me. "Tom would never do something like that. You must have put it there yourself to stir up drama," she yelled. I couldn't believe it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the camera, about how easily my mom had defended him. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my room. I froze. My door creaked open, and I saw Tom standing there in the darkness, just watching me. I sat up and whispered, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer at first. Then, in the calmest voice, he said, "You're not safe here." The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. I told my best friend, who insisted I stay at her house for a while. I packed a bag and left, but when I came back a few days later to grab more clothes, my room was completely empty. Everything, furniture, posters, clothes, was gone. When I asked my mom, she just shrugged and said, "Tom thought it was time for a fresh start." I haven't been back since. I'm staying with my friend permanently now, and I've started therapy to process everything. But sometimes I still feel like Tom is watching me. A few nights ago, I swear I saw his car parked outside my friend's house. If anyone's been through something similar, how did you get away? I feel like I'm going crazy. Growing up, it was just me and my mom. When she met Derek, I was happy for her. She deserved someone who could make her smile again. He was charming, brought her flowers, and even went out of his way to make me feel included. At first, I thought he was perfect, but something changed after they got married. It started small. Derek became overly controlling. He'd question where I was going, who I was texting, even what I was wearing. At first, I thought he was just trying to be protective, but it didn't feel right. The worst part was how my mom seemed oblivious, like she was under some kind of spell. One night, I woke up to a faint tapping sound. It was coming from outside my bedroom window. I live on the second floor, so it didn't make any sense. When I pulled back the curtain, Derek was standing in the backyard, staring up at me. I froze. He didn't wave or say anything, just stood there, completely still, staring. I backed away from the window and hid under my blankets, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. The next morning, I asked him why he was outside so late, and he smiled like nothing was wrong. "I was just getting some fresh air," he said, but the way he looked at me sent chills down my spine. Then, things got worse. I started finding my bedroom door unlocked in the mornings, even though I always locked it before bed. My phone would go missing, only to show up later in random places like the fridge or the laundry room. One night, I woke up to the feeling of someone watching me. When I opened my eyes, Derek was sitting in the chair by my desk. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dark, but I knew it was him. "Go back to sleep," he whispered, his voice low and monotone. I told my mom everything the next day, but she wouldn't believe me. She said I was overreacting and that Derek was just trying to bond with me. "He's new at this whole stepdad thing," she said. "I don't think he's trying to bond. I think he's trying to control me, or worse. I'm staying at a friend's house for now, but I feel like Derek's not done with me. My mom keeps begging me to come home, but I can't. Not while he's there. Has anyone else dealt with something like this? How do I convince my mom before it's too late?" When my mom introduced me to Dan, I wasn't sure what to think. He was polite, cracked a lot of dad jokes, and seemed genuinely interested in making our little family work. For a while, things were great. He helped me with school projects, taught me how to drive, and always had advice when I needed it. But looking back, there were signs that something wasn't right. It started with his rules. At first, they seemed reasonable. No locked doors. Let him know where I was going. No staying out past 9 p.m. But over time, they got stricter. He wanted to know my passwords, wanted me to text him updates every hour when I wasn't home, and even started picking out clothes he thought were appropriate for me. The night it all unraveled was supposed to be normal. My mom was working late, and Dan offered to cook dinner. While he was in the kitchen, I went to grab my phone charger from his office. His door was slightly open, and I noticed his computer screen lit up. Curiosity got the best of me, and I stepped closer. What I saw made my stomach drop. There were folders labeled with my name, my mom's name, and even the names of neighbors and co-workers. Inside were hundreds of photos, most of me. Some were normal, taken from family outings, but others were disturbing. Pictures of me sleeping, showering, and even changing in my room. I backed away, shaking, and bumped into the doorframe. That's when I heard Dan's voice behind me. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said calmly, too calmly. I ran out of the house without grabbing anything. I stayed with a friend that night and tried to tell my mom the next morning, but Dan had already gotten to her. He spun some story about how I was being rebellious, sneaking around and making up lies. She believed him. Now I'm stuck. I've filed a report with the police, but Dan is careful. He's made sure there's no trace of those photos anymore. My mom keeps calling, begging me to come home, but I can't. I can't go back. How do you prove something when no one believes you? I feel like I'm losing my mind. Has anyone else dealt with something like this? What do I do? Title: Something about the house felt off. When we moved into the new house, I thought it was a fresh start. My mom had been saving for years, and finally, we had a place to call our own. It was bigger than anywhere we'd lived before, with lots of little nooks and hidden spaces. I loved it at first, until I started noticing strange things. It began with the sounds. At night, I'd hear creaks on the stairs, like someone was slowly walking up. Our floors were old, so I chalked it up to the house settling. But then I started waking up to find my door slightly ajar, even though I always shut it tight before bed. One evening, I was in the basement looking for an old photo album. I stumbled across a box labeled with my name. I hadn't put it there, and when I opened it, I found things that shouldn't have been there. A hairbrush I'd lost months ago, a pair of earrings I hadn't seen in years, even an old school ID card. I asked my mom about it, and she seemed confused. "Maybe you put it there and forgot," she said. But I knew I hadn't. Then things got more unsettling. I'd come home from school to find my room rearranged. Books moved, drawers slightly open, clothes shifted. My mom said she hadn't been in there, and I didn't have anyone else to blame. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, like it was coming from somewhere just outside my door. The scariest moment happened a few nights ago. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I glanced up at the mirror and saw a shadow move across the hallway behind me. I called out, thinking it was my mom, but no one answered. When I stepped into the hall, the light to my room was on, even though I'd turned it off before heading to bed. That's when it hit me. There was only one other person in the house who could have been doing all of this. My mom's new husband. He's always been quiet, almost too quiet. Now, I can't shake the feeling that he's been watching me, waiting for me to notice. My mom says I'm overthinking things, but I can't ignore the way he always seems to know things about me, things I've never told anyone. I don't know what to do. If I leave, where would I go? How do I confront someone who acts so normal around everyone else? Has anyone ever dealt with something like this? I need advice. When my mom first started dating Greg, I didn't think much of it. She deserved to be happy after years of being on her own, and Greg seemed decent enough. He'd bring her flowers, joke around with me, and even fixed a broken shelf in my room without me asking. But after he moved in, things began to feel off. It started with little comments. Greg would casually mention things he couldn't have known, like how I used to sleep with a nightlight as a kid or the name of my childhood stuffed animal. When I asked him how he knew, he'd laugh it off, saying my mom must have told him. Except I'd never told her those things either. One night, I came home late from a friend's house and found him sitting in the dark living room. He didn't say a word, just watched me as I walked past. The next morning, he made a snide comment about the friend I'd been with, though I'd never told him who I was seeing. I decided to investigate. I started checking my room for hidden cameras or bugs, convinced he was spying on me. But I didn't find anything, until I checked my closet. Behind a loose panel, I found a small notebook. It was full of detailed notes about me, my favorite foods, my daily routine, even private conversations I'd had with my friends. Some of the entries went back years, long before Greg had even met my mom. My heart sank. I confronted him that night, waving the notebook in his face. His reaction chilled me to the bone. He didn't deny it. He just smiled and said, "You're even more interesting in person." My mom didn't believe me when I told her. She said I must have made the notebook myself to cause trouble. Greg has been acting normal since then, like nothing happened. But I know he's watching me. I've started staying out late, crashing at friends' places whenever I can, but I'm scared it's not enough. I swear I see his car parked near my school sometimes, even when he's supposed to be at work. Has anyone dealt with something like this? How do I make my mom see what's really going on before it's too late? first time I met Mike, I didn't like him. He didn't do anything outright rude, but there was something about him that rubbed me the wrong way. He didn't try to win me over like other guys my mom had dated. Instead, he just moved into our lives like he belonged there. At first, it was little things that annoyed me. He'd barge into my room without knocking or hover too close when I was doing homework. I figured he was just trying too hard, but it felt invasive. He'd say things like, "This is our house now. We don't need secrets here." Then it got worse. One evening, I got out of the shower and found Mike sitting on my bed. He was flipping through one of my notebooks, the kind where I wrote private stuff like my thoughts and little doodles. I snatched it from him and yelled, asking what the hell he was doing. He didn't even flinch. He just smiled and said, "I'm trying to understand you better." That night, I locked my door for the first time. The next morning, the lock was broken. When I asked him about it, he laughed and said, "You don't need locks in this house. It's not safe." From then on, I started feeling like I was being watched all the time. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear the floor creaking outside my room. One time, I found my phone moved from my nightstand to the living room, and another time, my laundry basket had been dumped out and rearranged. The final straw happened last week. I came home from school early, and the house was empty, or so I thought. I heard noises coming from my room and walked in to find Mike going through my drawers. My underwear drawer. He didn't even look guilty. He just said, "You need to clean these out. It's messy in here." I told my mom everything, but she brushed it off, saying Mike was just trying to help me stay organized. I feel like I'm going crazy. I've started keeping a bag packed in case I need to leave. But where would I even go? Has anyone dealt with something like this? How do you get someone to believe you when the person hurting you acts so normal? When my mom met Rob, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't the kind of kid who got involved in her dating life, and he seemed fine, a little quiet, but polite enough. He worked as a locksmith, which felt like a random skill, but I didn't give it much thought at the time. Things started feeling weird not long after he moved in. Rob had keys to everything, not just to our house, but to the shed, the car, the attic, places I didn't even realize had locks. At first, it seemed convenient. He'd always have a spare if we got locked out, but then I noticed he had keys to my room, too. It wasn't a big deal until one night when I woke up and saw my door cracked open. I always closed it before going to bed, but now there was a sliver of light from the hallway. I told myself it was just the wind or something, but it kept happening. Every few nights, I'd wake up and find the door slightly open. One time, I pretended to be asleep, and I swear I saw Rob standing in the doorway just staring. I tried locking my door after that, but the lock would never hold. It wasn't broken. It was like someone was unlocking it from the outside. The turning point came when I found a little device under my bed. It looked like a small camera, but I wasn't sure. I showed it to my mom, and she brushed it off, saying Rob probably left it there by mistake. "You know how he's always tinkering with stuff," she said. I couldn't let it go, so I confronted Rob myself. I showed him the device and demanded to know what it was. He just smiled and said, "You shouldn't worry about things you don't understand." That night, I heard footsteps outside my window. When I looked out, I saw Rob standing in the yard, holding something shiny in his hand. It looked like another set of keys. I don't feel safe in my own house anymore. My mom keeps telling me I'm imagining things, but I know Rob is watching me. He has access to everything, and there's nowhere I can hide. If anyone's been through something like this, how do you make it stop? How do you protect yourself from someone who can open every door? When we moved into the new house, I thought it was a fresh start. My mom had been saving for years, and finally, we had a place to call our own. It was bigger than anywhere we'd lived before, with lots of little nooks and hidden spaces. I loved it at first, until I started noticing strange things. It began with the sounds. At night, I'd hear creaks on the stairs, like someone was slowly walking up. Our floors were old, so I chalked it up to the house settling. But then I started waking up to find my door slightly ajar, even though I always shut it tight before bed. One evening, I was in the basement looking for an old photo album. I stumbled across a box labeled with my name. I hadn't put it there, and when I opened it, I found things that shouldn't have been there. A hairbrush I'd lost months ago, a pair of earrings I hadn't seen in years, even an old school ID card. I asked my mom about it, and she seemed confused. "Maybe you put it there and forgot," she said. But I knew I hadn't. Then things got more unsettling. I'd come home from school to find my room rearranged. Books moved, drawers slightly open, clothes shifted. My mom said she hadn't been in there and I didn't have anyone else to blame. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, like it was coming from somewhere just outside my door. The scariest moment happened a few nights ago. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I glanced up at the mirror and saw a shadow move across the hallway behind me. I called out, thinking it was my mom, but no one answered. When I stepped into the hall, the light to my room was on, even though I'd turned it off before heading to bed. That's when it hit me. There was only one other person in the house who could have been doing all of this, my mom's new husband. He's always been quiet, almost too quiet. Now I can't shake the feeling that he's been watching me, waiting for me to notice. My mom says I'm overthinking things, but I can't ignore the way he always seems to know things about me. Things I've never told anyone. I don't know what to do. If I leave, where would I go? How do I confront someone who acts so normal around everyone else? Has anyone ever dealt with something like this? I need advice. Thank you for tuning in. See you in the next video.